Good afternoon and welcome back to Take Action News. This is Daniel Marans, executive producer of Take Action News with David Schuster. We're joined right now by Bob Cesca. He's a blogger at the Daily Banter. You can also follow him at Twitter at @BobCesca_go. You can also listen to his podcast, The Bob and Chez Show, which we host right here on We Act Radio. Bob's joining us from the great state of Hawaii. Bob, thanks for joining us on Take Action News.
Hey, thanks, Daniel.
Bob, I want to start off first. We're hearing from the Obama administration that there's a commitment right now to making the processes by which the National Security Agency does mine this metadata of people's phone records and internet records more transparent by declassifying as much as possible and also finally appointing a civilian civil liberties oversight board. Isn't that proof positive in and of itself that these leaks have had a significant and positive impact on our civil liberties debate in this country?
Well, it depends on how far they go. I mean, that could mean just about anything in terms of what they end up releasing, who they appoint to this board. I mean, if you begin your analysis based upon the fact that the Obama administration lies about everything and the NSA is totally secretive, how can you accept that? I mean, but in addition, I think the bigger concern here is that because of the way this leak was handled, not only by Glenn Greenwald but by other reporters, and the way Snowden has comported himself in the interim, it seems to me as if future Edward Snowdens will have a more difficult time leaking any additional information. Now, I think in terms of what.
Well, hold on, Bob. I want to just get something straight there. You said that it depends how it's declassified. Do you actually think that there's a danger that the Obama administration would go too far in appeasing critics of these programs?
No, I definitely don't think that.
Okay.
In fact, that's exactly what I'm saying. Okay. I don't think that they're going to release information that's going to be damaging in any way or overly revealing. I think it's really up in the air in terms of how they proceed about that process.
But the fact of the matter is, we've seen a term from the administration essentially acknowledging that this is a system that, given the transparency of the FISA courts as they currently stand, may need some more transparency. And so we've essentially seen the public policy needle move as a result of Snowden's revelations. I mean, does he deserve any credit for that?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's a net effect. It's a net effect in terms of, well, maybe the needle has moved a little bit that way, but maybe it's going to swing back in the opposite direction in other ways. So we don't know exactly how it's all going to play out, based on that news, based on other information that's going to end up coming out. We don't know where we are, and that's why I continue to ask questions about this, and why others are too.
And I think that is perfectly legitimate. Obviously, I'm more sympathetic, perhaps, to the actions that Snowden took in particular, and in this particular case. But you're essentially arguing, if I'm not mistaken, that the security risk that this may have caused and the way that it was done could have a chilling effect on other more significant whistleblowers or supposed alleged whistleblowers in the future. But there hasn't been any proof that this has been a major security threat to the United States, has there?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think some of the information, and for example, some of the leaks to the Chinese about wiretapping them and about hacking them, I think that definitely hurts the United States. I think our posture on the diplomatic stage, on the international stage, has been damaged by some of this information. Specifically the G20 leak and the China leak.
The G20 leak I buy. The G20 leak I buy because I think that was legitimate intelligence gathering, and I think that there may have been some self-interested stuff on the Snowden end. But in terms of the China stuff, I mean, wouldn't it just have been better if we weren't hypocritical and constantly accusing China of hacking our civilian infrastructure, and then it turns out we weren't just targeting their military bases. We were intercepting data that was being transmitted from civilian institutions like universities and things like that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
about arms control. I mean, that's the information they were getting from the university was about arms control.
We don't know that it was just limited to that. We're talking about routers that take in massive amounts of information without a specific filter.
But I mean, there's lots of irrelevant information in there that they don't even care about. What they're doing is they're looking at, obviously what this university is doing with regards to arms control and its communications with the Chinese government. I think that's all valuable intelligence. I think to undermine that not only embarrasses the United States on the world stage, but it also hurts our relations with that country, a really volatile relationship at that.
Again, perhaps I think that there is a degree of truth in that, but I do think that the United States is also getting some blowback right now from revelations about it. In some ways, it's hypocrisy. We're talking with Bob Cesca, the host of the Bob and Chez show. It's an excellent podcast I encourage everyone to listen to, and also a blogger at the Daily Banter and the Huffington Post. Bob, I have to ask, though, we're looking at a situation right now where the Director of National Intelligence, General James Clapper, lied to Congress about the existence of these programs when he probably could have done so in a way without lying. Is that a positive? I mean, that's another thing that was revealed by these revelations. Is that in itself a positive development? Do you give Snowden and Greenwald credit for revealing that?
Well, again, seen through a keyhole.
But I'm not asking about the net effect. I'm asking isolated, specific results of this revelation.
Yeah, well, we are, but at the same time, Daniel, we're also seeing discussion from this letter that was delivered from these 22 senators to the administration. We're also seeing in a lot of the hearings very relevant concerns about making sure that future Snowdens do not occur, making sure to close those loopholes. Now, is that going to be a net positive? Is that going to be a net negative? We don't know how it all plays out. By the way, going back to Clapper, I'm not going to sit here and defend Clapper. I mean, that's.
But we wouldn't have found out about Clapper had it not been for Snowden. In fact, look, I mean, I don't buy what you're saying in terms of the chilling effect on future leakers because of the crackdown. Because even the crackdown now is being leaked about. I mean, what McClatchy broke last week about this insider threat program where the government is looking at federal workers' mood swings and things like that, and encouraging federal workers to tell on their employees. If anything, we're now seeing an acceleration of leakers because of the overreach, and that's anybody's guess. I'll concede that it is something of a wash here. Look, I think the bottom line is, can we trust the transparency of the FISA courts when they're issuing these warrants to mine the metadata, A, and B, as Snowden points out, even if there are policies in place that protect against this, the kind of access that he was given as something like a systems administrator meant that he could theoretically violate the rules with very few technical consequences. These things are audited only 5% after the fact, and that he had access at the very least if he had clearance, and the oversight committees in Congress haven't proven a formidable check in themselves either. So,
well, I mean that's kind of my point. I mean, that's what they're going to end up really clamping down on. They're going to make sure that mid-level IT analysts working for subcontractors at the NSA are not going to be able to have this kind of access anymore. So you're not going to have, future Edward Snowden grabbing up a bunch of documents on 4 laptops or thumb drives or whatever he used and then taking it to, future Glenn Greenwald. It's just not going to happen.
But, I mean, at the same time, I think that many civil libertarians would actually say the trade-off of them not having that access is perhaps equal or worth the idea that they wouldn't also have access to mine that data whimsically or capriciously in the hopes of pursuing a particular threat. And I think that's part of the issue, is sort of the individual discretion that's at play in these agencies. And presumably if one of these threats is formidable enough, then someone then higher up on the chain of command, and including with the greater protections that are involved with being a civil servant, would have the courage to step forward. I think that, would you at least admit, given the swing in opinion on these government policies, and I think you've even written this, I believe that you said the partisan paradigm has been turned upside down. What we've seen in terms of Democrats essentially standing by this policy, these government programs, this aggressive pursuit of leakers, and in fact the idea that even this program existed without the public knowing about it, and that this interpretation of the Patriot Act existed without the public knowing it was being done that way, that we now see a complete role reverse on which the Democrats support this by something like 60-30, and Republicans oppose it like 30-60, whereas in 2006 the reverse was true. Aren't Democrats being extremely hypocritical, and are people too eager to line up to defend the Obama administration just because Republicans are so hideous on every other thing?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's establish this. A lot of this information we already knew. I mean, there's been
we did not know that Section 215 of the Patriot Act was being used to gather all of the metadata of Americans' phone records. We thought that, that was revealed a couple times about the Bush administration. It was not at all clear that that was a kind of program that was being continued. And by the way, when it was being done by the Bush administration, Joe Biden, of all people, was outraged and thought it was a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Well, yeah, see, that's the other side of this. That's the other side of it. And there is a little bit of hypocrisy going on both sides, sure. But I think a lot of it has to do with just the reality of the fact that you're going to trust a government that more closely holds your values. If there's overlap in the Venn diagram between you and, say, Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, naturally you're going to trust them with national security more than you would trust Dick Cheney and John Ashcroft and Donald Rumsfeld. That's just a reality of
Well, I think that's certainly understandable, but it may not be correct, obviously, because once these precedents are set, we've seen executive power increase linearly in the past several decades. And I would also add, are the Obama administration values my values when they're pursuing government leakers more than any other administration combined? Now 7 government leakers that they're using the Department of Justice to prosecute, but they haven't brought a single case to trial against one of the Wall Street banks. Those aren't my values, so I'm kind of scared of the Obama administration too, and I think most rank-and-file Democrats should be as well.
Yeah, well, I think, if you ask a Republican, the Obama administration hasn't gone far enough to prosecute leakers. And a lot of these prosecutions too.
If you ask Peter King, not all Republicans. Not all. A lot of Republicans now are. The libertarian wing of the party is much more prevalent than, let's say, it was 3 or 4 years ago with, I think, the Tea Party and some of these elected officials.
Well, there's also a fallacy going around that the Obama administration has had this, record of throwing the Espionage Act at everybody. And in fact, a lot of those cases, were begun under the Bush administration. And it takes a long time to prosecute. And so, I think, yes, he's been clamping down on leakers, but, it's because I think there are more leakers. I think it's easier to do it now with the advance of digital technology and the internet, and you're going to see a lot more of that in terms of and I'm speaking historically.
And those of us that worry more about the state of the expansion of the surveillance state than those leaks per se would say that is sort of the price that we pay in the age of the freedom of information and the digital era, and that government secrecy. Look, I think that all these things should be redacted with due consideration. I don't agree with you. I do think that The Guardian and The Washington Post did a good job of weighing those concerns and apparently did redact this information tremendously. One last thing, Bob, and this will be my last question. It's been tremendous talking with you, obviously, even though we come at it from slightly different perspectives, and that is, I have to wonder if Edward Snowden would be as unwilling to come to the United States for trial if the person that may be in the most comparable position, Bradley Manning, wasn't held in a military brig for 3 years, without exactly being charged in a transparent way. His court docket is still sealed, and there's a lawsuit underway from journalists to unseal that document. But also, according to the United Nations, was tortured while incarcerated. Why would someone like Edward Snowden think that they would get fair treatment and trial in the United States of America?
Well, I'm not going to defend any alleged torture, but I think that, Bradley Manning, the big difference here is that he's a member of the military who swore an oath. That's not the case with Edward Snowden. I think.
But who's to say they wouldn't declare? They could have declared. They could declare Edward Snowden an enemy combatant. I could see that happening.
Well, now we're getting into sort of Alex Jones conspiracy territory here.
I don't think it's Alex Jones conspiracy territory. There's precedent. There's precedent.
They're going to hit Snowden with a drone or something like that.
I didn't say that. I did not say that. I said that given some of the precedent with this administration, I would not put it past them.
Both Greenwald and Snowden have alluded to that. They might somehow be killed by the United States government.
Well, that seems irrelevant to sort of the big issues at stake in that case. I'm not someone.
If we're going to compare Snowden to Daniel Ellsberg, let's look at Daniel Ellsberg's history. Daniel Ellsberg went to Boston and turned himself in.
He turned himself in after being in hiding for several days. The circumstances were different, and I think as Howard Zinn pointed out in his book Declarations of Independence, many civil disobedience figures, it really depends on the circumstances in terms of when they turn themselves in. Martin Luther King turned himself in Birmingham to help prove a point, but he might not have done so if he thought that he was at threat of death. By contrast...
In Birmingham? Yeah, of course, he was always under threat of death.
But
especially in Birmingham.
Oh, okay. Look, I think that there were many people that decided to go on the run, including the Berrigan brothers during the protests in Vietnam War, who believed that they could do more good by not being in prison, who believed that their cause was more important than that. Bob, I have to end it there, Bob, unfortunately, and I understand that is a controversial note to end it on. Bob Cesca, he's a blogger for the Daily Banter and Huffington Post. Read his stuff, it's fantastic. Follow him on Twitter, at @BobCesca_go, and of course the Bob and Chez Show on We Act Radio. Bob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
When Take Action News continues, we're going to talk with Lori Young, the Director of Aging Policy for the Gay and Lesbian Task Force. Tell us about some of the ramifications that the Supreme Court's DOMA ruling might have on elderly gay couples, and specifically Social Security benefits. When Take Action News continues after this.